What's going on, everybody? John Matrix here. Hope you're having yourselves a wonderful day wherever you're at and whenever you're watching this. We're gonna get into a little bit of some Lord of the Rings lore and mythology here. I'm a big Lord of the Rings fan. I've loved, all the Lord of the Rings movies, even the Hobbit movies. They weren't as good as the original trilogy, but still enjoyed them. And I would love to have an actual good, quote, good, set of movies, trilogy, or series from the Silmarillion, because there's a lot of really interesting, universe building, all that kind of stuff, lore that happens in the Silmarillion from what I understand. Some of it I know of, a lot of it that I don't. But the video that we're going to check out here today is from Nerd of the Rings on how Morgoth created the dragons. So links will be down below in the description, as always, to the original video without my commentary and reaction, and to the Nerd of the Rings channel. So please do me a favor, if you enjoy this video, go over to his channel and hit that like button, and check out the content on his channel and hit that sub button if you got some stuff that you enjoy. He makes a lot of content for Lord of the Rings, so check out all the stuff. If you'd like to join us when I do these reactions live, as I am right now with my YouTube members, we'd love to have you guys come in and hang out and join our discussions before, during, and after. There is a join button underneath the video, as well as a link in the description to YouTube membership benefits and tiers that I offer. So yeah, check all that stuff out if you would like to take your sport to the next level. Regardless, thank you guys very much for coming in, hanging out, checking out the video, taking the time out of your day to do so. Greatly appreciate it, and I hope you enjoy. Well, all said, jump into this here. So again, this is How Did Morgoth Create the Dragons by Nerd of the Rings.
They are among the greatest and most vile creatures in Middle-earth. Created by the first Dark Lord, they would plague men, elves, and dwarves far beyond their First Age origins. Yet perhaps the biggest question about them remains: how exactly were they created? Today on Nerd of the Rings, we tackle the question of how Morgoth created the dragons. As we lay out a few possible explanations for Morgoth's creation of the dragons, we must first acknowledge the biggest hurdle he may have faced: the limitations we see the Valar have in creation.
Yeah, I was gonna say, right, to my understanding of the lore, right, Iluvatar, God essentially in the universe, is really the only person who is able to actually create life. He has control over the flame of creation or something like that, I think. So I believe he's the only person that's able to actually really create things, but the rest of, I guess, the archangels, I always get Maiar, I always get those two confused on which one's which. I think the Maiar are the archangels or whatever that are kind of right under him, like Morgoth, etc. But I think they only are able to kind of mold and reshape things that are have already been created. So yeah, it's what creation did Morgoth take and twist to make the dragons? That is a good question. It's one that I honestly hadn't really thought of, right? Because Balrogs are essentially beings like Gandalf that have been twisted and tortured from the darkness. So what creature and orcs are twisted elves. So it's what did he use to make the dragons?
First and most well-known instance of this limitation being shown is when it comes to Aule, the smith of the Valar who creates the race of dwarves.
Yeah.
Impatient for the promised elves and men, Aule sets to making beings of his own, as he imagined the upcoming children of Iluvatar would be. He creates the stunted dwarves. Yet there is a problem. When Aule is not with them, or his mind is elsewhere, the dwarves stand idle, for they do not have true life of their own. Iluvatar, the god of Tolkien's world, confronts Aule and takes pity on the dwarves. As the only being in existence to wield the flame imperishable, Iluvatar gives this true life to the dwarves,
it's beautiful painting,
giving them Fear, or souls. We see this in other instances as well. Indeed, as a direct response to the creation of the dwarves, Aule's wife, Yavanna, is worried that this new race will wreak havoc on the trees of Middle-earth. And at her request, Iluvatar creates the Ents.
Interesting.
While Morgoth was indeed the mightiest of the Valar, it is confirmed many times that he would be incapable of giving true life to his creations.
That's pretty sick, right? So, like, they create something, but they don't have souls of their own. And so God, you know, Iluvatar, kind of takes pity, I guess, on them and grants them souls. And so then the dwarves had life of their own. And it's also interesting that that's how the ants got created, to manage the forest and keep the forest going, because she was afraid that the dwarves would wreak havoc amongst them. So that's a pretty cool creation myth. I mean, Tolkien's so good at that stuff, you know?
In the Silmarillion, we read, "And naught that had life of its own, nor the semblance of life, could ever Melkor make, since his rebellion in the Ainulindale, before the beginning, so say the wise." And in The Lord of the Rings, we have a quote, which is all too often butchered in online discourse. Here, Frodo speaks to Sam of the orcs after his rescue in the Tower of Cirith Ungol. "The shadow that bred them can only mock, it cannot make. Not real new things of its own. I don't think it gave life to the orcs. It only ruined them and twisted them."
Right.
And here we have the first prevailing theory of how Morgoth created dragons, by twisting existing creatures.
Right.
In earlier versions of Tolkien's writings, he has the orcs created from stone and based on, or rather in mockery of, the elves.
Interesting.
However, around the time of his writing The Lord of the Rings, Tolkien would put forth perhaps the most well-known origin, that Melkor would capture and torment wayward elves and twist them into the race of the orc. For more on these origins and others Tolkien would later write as possibilities, check out my video on the topic. If Morgoth were to make dragons from existing creatures, it would certainly make sense.
Right.
And it was likely far from the first time that he did this.
I'm just trying to think of what creature would be the origin of the dragons, right? Because, I mean, again, like, you look at the Balrogs are kind of the only thing that I can think of that are kind of like as imposing or somewhat as imposing, right? And dragons, at least some of them, are even on a level above Balrogs. Like in Calagon the Black is like one of the largest creatures in creation in you know, the Tolkien universe, from what I understand. And so it's like, how did he make that thing? How did he make something that large? And what were they twisted from? You know, because the Balrogs are essentially just angels. That's basically what Gandalf and Saruman are. And those wizards, they're just the same thing as them that have just been twisted by the darkness.
As we get a hint about another race of creature in the Two Towers. Here, Treebeard says to Merry and Pippin,
"Oh, well, we could, you know. You do not know, perhaps, how strong we are. Maybe you have heard of trolls? They are mighty strong, but trolls are only counterfeits, made by the enemy in the great darkness, in mockery of the Ents, as
interesting.
orcs were of elves."
So it sounds like trolls were made from ants in the same way. Interesting.
"We are stronger than trolls."
So Treebeard, who is one of the oldest beings in existence and lived through Morgoth's reign in the First Age, says trolls were made in mockery of Ents, just as orcs were of elves. Interestingly, Tolkien writing these words lines up quite well with his writings on orcs being corrupted elves. While we cannot be 100% certain, it is possible that trolls are indeed corrupted Ents. This would also go quite well with what we read of the Dark Lord early in the Silmarillion. Melkor spent his spirit in envy and hate, until at last he could make nothing save in mockery of the thought of others, and all their work he destroyed if he could. So perhaps dragons were corrupted beings. One theory is that they could have been corrupted eagles.
True.
Though it's worth noting that dragons...
But the first dragons didn't have flight, right? They were only able to like crawl or burrow, right? They didn't have wings, so that wouldn't really necessarily fit. Although I guess perhaps some of the later ones could have been.
Did not initially fly.
Right.
Only after hundreds of years did Morgoth manage to create winged dragons. But if not eagles, could they have been devised from another creature? Perhaps. The big issue remains the apparent sentience of these creatures.
Right, they're intelligent.
From Glaurung to Smaug, they seem to have their own thoughts and motivations, indicating they are likely beings with Fear or souls. But what if this soul came from elsewhere? What if, in his foul craft, Morgoth merged a hideous created shape with a spirit? This leads us to our second possibility, that dragons are inhabited by evil spirits. The best example of this practice comes not from Morgoth, but from Sauron. We are told that Morgoth's chief servant created the horrible race of the werewolves by imprisoning dreadful spirits within the bodies of great wolves. It's possible this was the same method used to create vampires, in which case evil spirits would be trapped within great bats.
That's interesting. I didn't even know that werewolves and vampires were a thing in Tolkien lore.
Could these kinds of spirits, which could very well have been fallen Maiar, have been at the heart of the dragons? It seems if dragons were corrupted Maiar like Balrogs, Tolkien would have stated it more directly. But perhaps one of these more vague spirits, perhaps lesser Maiar, could have been trapped within some horrible reptilian form of Morgoth's creation, giving life to the dragons. Indeed, it would seem it was not only werewolves and vampires that would see spirits take the forms of creatures. In the early pages of the Silmarillion, we see, "For his throne was set in majesty upon the pinnacle of Taniquetil, the highest of the mountains of the world, standing upon the margin of the sea. Spirits in the shape of hawks and eagles flew ever to and from his halls, and their eyes could see to the depths of the seas, and pierce the hidden caverns beneath the world." When it comes to creatures like werewolves, it's worth noting that after their creation as spirits within wolf bodies, it seems they were capable of reproducing. For Draugluin, the first of their race, is described as the sire of all werewolves, notably similar to how Glaurung is labeled father of dragons, meaning once the original sires of their race were created, it would not require this dark binding of spirit and body to create more.
So they could have been like the first dragons that crawled could have been created, you know, through this spirit fusion. And then they just had offspring that evolved into flying dragons, etc. Interesting.
But we also must wonder why, if dragons were devised in the same manner as werewolves, would we not have learned this within Tolkien's writings?
Right.
Could it be that there's a more secret and costly explanation for the origin of dragons? In the book Morgoth's Ring...
I mean, they seem unique, right? There's only so many dragons that were created, right? And only, as far as I know, like there were only so many dragons in the Tolkien universe in general. And I mean, like in the movie and book or whatever, you know, at the beginning when they're having the celebration, you know, you even hear Bilbo say like, you know, there hasn't been a dragon seen around these parts in over 1,000 years or something like that, you know, because I think dragons are supposed to be extinct after they got rid of Smaug or something like that, or at least extremely rare, you know, so. But he says here that it's races, but this is what Sauron built upon, the old method Morgoth used. He couldn't create, so he just destroyed and distorted things. Right.
We learn that the Dark Lord went to extreme lengths in an effort to conquer all the world. Indeed, like Sauron and his ring, Morgoth would pour his own power into the world itself. But in this way, Morgoth lost, or exchanged, or transmuted the greater part of his original angelic powers of mind and spirit, while gaining a terrible grip upon the physical world. For this reason, he had to be fought.
So it's like a situation where evil will always essentially be there as a part of the world, but in doing so, he also weakened himself in what his capabilities were.
Mainly by physical force, an enormous material ruin was a probable consequence of any direct combat with him, victorious or otherwise. What if Morgoth, having gone further than any Vala in pouring himself into the physical world, put some of his own essence into the dragons?
That's what I was gonna say, right? Like, what if, because of how like potent and strong and even large some of them were, like again in Calagon, like he poured some of his own essence into them.
While this may seem like,
and also, like, I don't know enough about the Silmarils, but maybe they had some kind of influence, because at one point in time, didn't Morgoth have all the Silmarils in his possession? And so didn't they give some kind of extra power? So maybe that's something to do with the Silmarils themselves, combined with his ability to transmogrify or transmorph, you know, things from something into something else.
Pure fan speculation. It's not entirely without merit within the books. In particular, we look at Glaurung's interaction with the elf Mablung. Here we find that Glaurung may have a deeper connection to his maker than many readers may have noticed. But he turned before he went in and looked back eastward, and there came from him the laughter of Morgoth, dim but horrible, as an echo of malice out of the black depths far away. And this voice, cold and low, came after.
There you lie like a vole under the bank, Mablung the mighty. Ill do you run the errands of Thingol. Haste you now to the hill and see what is become of your charge.
Here within the text we find the words, this voice, referencing the laughter of Morgoth that came from Glaurung. Indeed, some have interpreted this, I believe rightly, to mean that Glaurung in this moment speaks with the voice, of Morgoth.
Yeah.
And indeed, should you ever listen to the phenomenal Children of Húrin audiobook, you will find Sir Christopher Lee, for these lines, delivers them in his Morgoth voice. Could Morgoth's power have been so great that his very essence could live within dragons? Even those far—
I mean, it makes sense. I mean, there's precedence for it, right? I mean, you look at the One Ring. It's literally Sauron imbuing himself into the ring. So, you know, of course it could be a situation where, you know, Morgoth, you know, split parts of his own essence into other creatures.
Far into the Third Age, like Smaug, who existed long after Morgoth had been cast into the void? In the end, there is one last possibility. One I think could explain this quite simply. Dragons don't have souls. If we were to assume that dragons are creatures without Fear, albeit very nasty and cunning ones, it would solve the issue of Morgoth not being able to create true life.
But wouldn't it be a situation where it was the same with the dwarves, where they basically just become husks that don't do anything if they're not paid attention to? But then again, right, like, if Morgoth poured enough of his essence into the world itself, then maybe it's a situation where as long as they're in the world, they're always gonna have a part of him or a connection to him, you know, through the world itself. Maybe it's that kind of scenario, so maybe they didn't need souls. I don't know. Interesting.
And while this may seem a rather unsatisfying possibility, it is not without precedence. In the History of Middle-earth volume Morgoth's Ring, we read about Huan the Hound, and the character that would later be named Thorondor, the first lord of the Great Eagles, where Tolkien says they, could be Maiar, emissaries of Manwë. But unfortunately, in The Lord of the Rings, Gwaihir and Lendroval are said to be descendants of Sorontar, which is Thorondor's earlier name. In summary, I think it must be assumed that talking is not necessarily the sign of possession of a rational soul or Fea. The same sort of thing may be said of Huan and the Eagles. They were taught language by the Valar and raised to a higher level, but they still had no Fear. Should this be the case, dragons may not have souls at all.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, that could very well be the case where they were just some kind of dark, evil, twisted thing that he gave a higher intelligence or purpose to, though on the evil side of things compared to the Eagles.
Just like Huan and the Great Eagles, they were simply beasts elevated to a higher state of being, where they could be taught speech and have independent thought and action.
And have intelligence.
This would also open the door for things like,
I guess, would that then mean that if they worked at it long enough that they could have taught the dwarves and the ants how to be that way as well without imbuing souls in them? Or is it a situation where maybe you can only have so many of a certain type of species, you know, before, like, if you have too many of a certain species, that at some point in time they have to be imbued with souls, otherwise there's just too many of them to, like, teach or elevate, you know? I don't know.
like trolls to have been created in the same fashion. Now, it's worth noting that in a note written on the very same paper as this essay, Tolkien would list Huan as a Maya robed in the form of a beast. And later, in 1970, he would write a piece found in The Nature of Middle-earth, saying the Eagles were indeed Maiar. As with a fair number of things, we can only take somewhat educated guesses at the true nature and origin of dragons.
I mean, for as great as Tolkien's works are, it definitely seems like as he went along and wrote different books, he changed things from original ideas. So, I mean, some of the stuff that was earlier on, he changed later on. So who knows what his original intent for them were, and maybe what other ideas he had for them as he wrote the stories.
As we've seen with beings like orcs, eagles, and Huan the Hound, even if Tolkien had given us an explicit origin for dragons, it's entirely possible he might have changed his mind later on. But now I want to hear what you think. Let me know in the comments which of these possible explanations for the creation of dragons you think has the most merit. And if you have other theories, I'd love to hear them. At the end of the day, Tolkien may not have given us a fully mapped out equation for how dragons came to be, but he gave us something far better. He gave us incredible villains in dragon form, from the malicious Glaurung to the cunning Smaug. Whatever their origins, they remain among the greatest dragons in all of literature. As always, I want to say a huge thank you to all my Patreon and YouTube supporters who make this channel possible.
All right, well, there we go. There we go. How did Morgoth create the dragons by Nerd of the Rings? Links will be down below in the description as always to the original video, without my commentary and reaction, and to the Nerd of the Rings channel. So please do me a favor, if you enjoyed this video of his, go over to his channel and be sure to hit that like button and check out the content on his channel. And if you enjoy the videos he puts out, hit that sub button. I mean, yeah, the origins of the dragons has been something that I always have really kind of wondered about. And I guess it's just, there is no real confirmation as to how Morgoth really made them or what. Because I mean, like, we know how the Balrogs are made. We know how the orcs, you know, are made. They're just, and we know that Morgoth essentially has to take creatures that already exist in some form, and he has to, you know, twist them and transform them into the dark creatures, you know, that he makes, because he can't actually create life itself. So, I mean, for me, I feel like because of how powerful the dragons were, and because of how few of them there were, right? I think the idea of Morgoth imbuing his essence into creatures to give them that much more power makes sense, right? Especially because from what I understand, and again, correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but from what I understand, like in Calagon, you know, the greatest and largest of the dragons was supposed to be like his last ditch, like super weapon to break the siege that was happening. Because if I remember correctly, like they had like Morgoth pinned in his fortress somewhere, and they basically had him blockaded and sieged for I don't know how long, and so he essentially created Calagon as like his super weapon to break the siege and push things back and to go out and to then be able to, you know, reconquer everything, etc. So it would make sense. I don't remember the exact quotes, but I feel like it was something where like, yeah, he went to his, something about him going into his forages or something like that and taking a certain amount of time to create Calagon. So to me, that would make sense that, yeah, him taking the time to like really put as much potency into this creature as possible, which would also explain why it's so large, you know, would make sense. So who knows? And I mean, it could be a mixture of all of these things, you know, maybe it was a mire that was twisted, but instead of twisting it into a Balrog, was through the various things that he did, was able to form it into dragons and then imbue it with even greater power through instilling his essence into it. So who knows? Who knows? But I feel like that's probably the explanation that makes the most sense. So yeah, but it's interesting to, you know, think about these things and theorize about it. You know, it's one of the great things about universes and lore like this, where a lot of it is explained, but there's definitely some stuff that is left open to theorize and what if and interpret. So but yeah, thank you guys for watching. Again, that was How Did Morgoth Create the Dragons by Nerd of the Rings. Check out his stuff on his channel, give him a like and a sub if you enjoy his stuff. If you enjoyed this video of mine with my commentary and reaction, consider leaving a like and a sub on my channels. It helps me and the channel grow, lets the YouTube algorithm gods know that you enjoy this kind of content and you want to see some more. I greatly appreciate you guys coming in and hanging out and watching the video all the way through. If you're still here watching at the end, it means a lot. I greatly appreciate the support. If you'd like to join us when I do these reactions live, there's a join button underneath the video, as well as a link in the description to the YouTube membership benefits and tiers that I offer. So if you want to, you know, take your support to the next level, you can check all that stuff out. You can get early access videos, forwarding and reaction requests, members only Discord channels, and other stuff. So yeah, check all that stuff out, see if it'd be interesting and see if it would have any interest for you. But yeah, thank you guys for watching. I just greatly appreciate it. Hope you're having yourselves a wonderful day. We'll see you on that.